Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. I'm down here at Darling Harbour in front of I think it's called the Home nightclub, and it's a wet old morning. It's raining and it's cooled down a bit, I must admit. But we'll see how we go with this vlog today. I'm just standing under a tree at the moment, so if the rain doesn't get too much heavier, I should be okay, I think, to punch out yet another episode of Jim's 5am Club. We're going to go a little bit deeper today than what we normally do, and we're going to talk about a book entitled Manufacturing Consent by a world-renowned author who just recently passed away, I'm sad to say, and his name is Noam Chomsky. So this book is a deeper look behind the curtain of media, behind the curtain of governments, behind the curtain of elites, to try and identify how, why do these organisations of people, how do they use their power to shape the narrative and to manufacture, as the title to this book says, how they manufacture consent, how they manipulate, how they shape our views, and how they set an agenda that everybody seems to follow, and it becomes a thing called a system. And Noam, in his, clever, witty way, opens up this book with a concept where he says that the education system that we have, the way we educate our children, the way we educate our adults, the whole system is skewed to a particular narrative. And he says that education is a system of imposed ignorance, which is interesting to say and interesting to think about, that our education system in many ways is responsible for the way we think, the way we behave, and the worldview that we adopt and use as a baseline and benchmark to compare and contrast what happens in our lives and what happens in the world, and how we use that to make sense of what's going on. The education system adjusts and sets our thermostat, our understanding, to help us or to hinder us. You be the judge. So what the author goes on to say is that the media, and there's different forms of media, of late, over the past decade or so, we've got social media, where you've got platforms for people to air their views, to form opinions and to share opinions. And before that, we had different forms of media. We had print media, and we also had television media and radio media. So, and prior to that, of course, we had books and other forms to propagate and to pass on information, misinformation and disinformation. But what's happened now is we've got media springing up from everywhere. We've got influencers popping up everywhere who have opinions, and as we know, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but not all opinions are equal. We've got people who have learned opinions. We have people who have heavyweight opinions, but we've also got a group who have featherweight opinions. And the big challenge that we all face is trying to discern which are the heavyweight opinions, which are the learned opinions, and which are the featherweight, bird brain, bimbo opinions. But regardless of how we look at it, what the author says here is that media promotes social norms and behaviours and are able to influence in various degrees those social norms and those behaviours. Just over the past few weeks, we've seen here in Sydney, throughout Australia and throughout the world, this push for pride, what's called the Pride movement. And I really don't know why they call it the Pride movement, because I always scratch my head and say to myself, proud of what? But there is a movement, a rainbow movement, that is supporting and promoting this LGBTQI asterisk, anything goes. I think they should rename it and just call it H-, so anybody who's not heterosexual can fit into this other group. But what's currently happening is there is a worldwide promotion by the media, by governments, by you name it, by every woke organisation, trying to get on the bandwagon to hide their own inefficiencies and ineffectiveness and their own wrongdoings by supporting these other woke movements, movements that create distraction. And what they're doing is that by supporting these other movements, they're slowly but surely changing social norms and behaviours and recalibrating the world's view and changing what we know is right and what we know is wrong into things that no longer make sense. Who would have thought 40 years, 50 years, 100 years ago that you'd be looking back in 2021 and wondering, what has happened? All the things that we knew were wrong when we were growing up, now we have governments, we have corporations, we have different influences, different media trying to tell us that all that stuff that was wrong is now right, and all the stuff that was right is now wrong. And we're trying to convince ourselves that in a world which is indeed binary, science is binary, there's black as white, there's positive, there's negative, there's electrons, there's neutrons, there's day, there is night, there is man, there is woman. You look at it, regardless of where you look in the world, in science, everything is binary. It's either one or the other. And yet we have social movements, we have the media now trying to convince us that there's this whole grey area which exists and which is okay. But at the end of the day, it's all a figment of our imagination. And if you stop being able to categorise things, if you stop being able to place things into boxes, then it becomes very, very hard for your mind to be able to function and your brain being able to function, because human beings function well, function best when they have limits, when they have barriers, when they have definitions, clear definitions of what is one and what is the other, what is and what is not. But sadly, we are now in a position where, regardless of where you look, you've got organisations, public organisations, private organisations, and people who, as I said before, are on a bandwagon. And the reason why they're on the bandwagon is, of course, to make money and to create confusion, to stimulate and promote fear, uncertainty and doubt, and to control the narrative, to control people, to be able to control what we see as being right and wrong. And by confusing the situation, by muddying the waters, they are able to control us on a daily basis, not only us, but our children, our families, and everybody else. The people who control the country are more in charge of the narrative and the agenda than what we think, is what Noam Chomsky alludes to. And interesting enough, he says that there is an unequal division of stories that are skewed to particular interests, even though the media boasts that they are objective. We all know that people who are in the media tend to be on the left side, are lefties, and their confirmation biases are skewed to a particular narrative, to a particular agenda, and their stories are skewed. But regardless of how skewed their stories are, regardless of how voluminous their stories are, regardless of how many times they parade, they say things, they promote things, it doesn't make it right. As my mother used to say back in the days when I was growing up, you know, there's no degree of right and wrong. Either it's right or it's wrong. And if you don't know the difference, then chances are you're going to get sucked in to the vortex of confusion, and you're going to have problems, serious problems in your life, where you won't know the difference between right and wrong. And as the old Greek saying says, the man who wears two watches can never tell the right time, and so it be it, that if you don't know the difference between right and wrong, if you're wearing two watches, if you're non-binary, then you're never going to be able to tell the difference between one or the other, because there'll be a blurring of definition which is going to confuse you and cause you grief throughout your life. So Noam goes on to say that there is an elite ruling class who control the news media and what the news media writes and promotes. And there is always a bigger fish. And the media pander to someone for political and financial incentives that benefit the elite and they govern what the news shares and talks about. So what we're saying here is that there are interests at play. I remember working many years ago at Advantra, and there was a fellow there, an Indian fellow that I talked with. He was quite wise and interesting to chat with. And he says, James, there's just no evil or wrong in the world. There are just differing interests. And it's by understanding these differing interests that you can get a better understanding of what makes the world go round. But, these interests, these different interests, these competing interests are the ones, sadly, that are shaping the narrative and shaping the agenda, shaping the things that our children learn at school, shaping the things that people learn at university, shaping the things that trend on social media, or the things that don't trend on social media that are going to influence us both consciously and subconsciously. So Noam is basically saying to us to be very discerning with what we read, who we hang out with, how we think, and what we let into our minds. Because at the end of the day, there is a huge and grave danger in terms of having an open mind, because an open mind without a guard at the gate, an open mind without rules of engagement and rules to follow, will eventually be an open-cut garbage tip that will house everybody else's rubbish, everybody else's garbage, everybody else's conspiracy theory. And once you accumulate and create a baseline of understanding and a particular worldview, confirmation biases and all the biases that we have will continue to scan the universe, looking for evidence to support and promote what we already think and what we already know, rather than to challenge what we already think and already know. So be careful is the key message that comes from Noam in terms of what you believe, because what you believe will become the prison cell that you'll end up suffering in for the rest of your life. And if you don't fight for something, if you don't have values, if you don't have ideals, if you don't have a system of right and wrong, then you're not able to fight for something. Guess what? You'll fall for everything. But you won't fall for everything that you believe in. You'll fall for everything else that other people want you to believe in. Because we must never forget that advertisers out there are scientists. They know how the brain works. They know how the mind works. They know how to influence people's behaviours. And the advertisers' interests, according to Noam, are what govern what the news shares because of their payment to news stations. Now, we've got television programs like The Project, who existed based on a woke foundation. And the reason why they had the woke foundation, why they decided to start supporting everything that was contemporary and just left the field, was that shock factor created ratings. That shock factor brought people to their channel. That shock factor influenced and shaped people's behaviour and people's appetite for stories, and hence they based their programs on just being controversial, just being different, just being popular, pandering to what people want to hear in order to survive. And that in itself made them popular, got money coming their way, got advertising dollars coming their way. And once you create a platform and a basis, then you're able to shape it and to exploit it. A lot of people try to become advertisers or influencers on social media by being provocative, by showing their butts and their tits and you name it. I won't be sexist here, or try not to be sexist, but you know what I mean, when people just change their appearance in order to attract attention. And once they attract attention, then the next step is to try and keep people's attention, and they do that by being provocative, by being tempting in what they do, being suggestive. And then once they get their audience, then they can start selling things to their audience, or not only selling their things, but selling the things that other people have. So what other people have, they do look for influencers to sell their wares, not because the influencer believes in those products, those ideas, those concepts, but because the influencer now can make money, then they're happy to support any cause in order to feather their nests and to make some money. So to make it in the media world, you've got to pay for expensive reporters and publishing equipment. It costs money, where it used to cost a lot of money in the past. It's also a very competitive industry, and for these reasons, advertisers play a large part in the reporting and publishing business. And to get business, you need to keep the advertisers happy, and it's called filio quantis. And as we say, there's always a great bias, and the goal is to maximize sales. The goal is to maximize advertising revenue. And in order to do that, you need to capture an audience, you need to keep an audience, and you need to keep on playing on their minds. And the last point that Noam makes is a very interesting one and very controversial. And he says that the upper class pays for experts to share their skewed findings and media outlets. He asks the question, who are the experts that the people quote on the news? Who are the experts that people quote in social media? Who are these experts? And what Noam says is a lot of these experts may be doctors, may be scientists, but these experts have skewed views which feather the interests of a particular elite class, a particular elite group, and these experts may not be accepted throughout their profession. Their views may be skewed, their views may be extreme, but if the media use them and promote them, then they're giving them validation. They validate it, and once you validate a particular interest, then that is where the manipulation, the misinformation, the disinformation comes into play. So experts are funded and influenced by somebody. What may seem objective and authoritative may be a scandal. Facts and information are skewed to influence and these are propagated and shared through media and become the new knowledge, the new norm. And we basically just need to be careful. We need to be cautious. As Noam says, that these games are constantly at play, and it's up to each person, it's up to each family, it's up to each community to be aware of the games that are being played and to question what's going on. I remember years ago going and seeing one of the famous authors, the father of critical thinking, and I've forgotten his name now, but he had a book called The Five Hats. I can't believe that I've forgotten his name, but anyway, I'm doing this off the cuff without notes. And I remember him saying that all the people who end up going to university or going to secondary school aren't necessarily critical thinkers. They've been taught how to think, they've been taught what to think, and at the end of the day, they are some of the most ignorant people in the world because they have been fed an agenda. They have been fed a narrative, and that narrative and that agenda are used for them to decide and to determine what things mean based on that agenda and that narrative that they've been shaped in. It's the water that the goldfish swims in. The goldfish doesn't realise that it's in water, can't see the water, and similarly today's educated people, or people who purport or think to be educated, can't see the agenda and narrative that has been shaped around them. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me on this very interesting episode of Jim's 5am Club. As I say, I am an emissary, I am a messenger. My job is to simply take the key points from these books and present them, and to overlay them with some of my own experience and some of the lessons that I've learnt from the 1,500 other book summaries that I've presented. But it's sad to think that a man of Noam's calibre has passed away, but his deep thinking continues. His message continues in the world through the books that he wrote and the documentaries that he published and presented. Take care on this wet old Tuesday, and we'll chat again. All the best from Jim on Jim's 5am Club. Yassas.